Okay, so let's get right into it. The United States is, by pretty much any measure, one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. It's a global economic powerhouse. And yet, right here, inside its own borders, millions of people wake up every day with this gnawing uncertainty, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. It's this crazy contradiction, and today we're going to try and make sense of it. So, let's start with a number. A big one. 33.8 million. According to the USDA, that's how many Americans didn't have reliable access to food back in 2021. I mean, think about that. That's more than 1 out of every 10 households. This isn't some far-off problem. It's happening in our communities all across the country. And that leads us right to the big question we're tackling today. With all this wealth and all this food, how on earth is this level of hunger even possible? What are the systems, the real costs, and the true causes behind this crisis?
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll really dig into that paradox. Then, we'll go behind the numbers and see the human side of this. We're going to look at the shocking economic costs, debunk a really popular myth about what causes hunger, check out America's safety net, and finally, see what it would actually take to end hunger by 2030.
All right, first up, let's just lay out how stark this contrast between America's wealth and its people's well-being really is. The numbers, well, they paint a very clear and honestly a very concerning picture. And here's where that paradox just smacks you in the face. The U.S. ranks #1 in the world for total GDP. It's an absolute economic titan. But when you look at food security among other developed countries, the basic ability to make sure your citizens have enough to eat, America plummets all the way down to 22nd place. That huge gap is exactly what we're here to understand. Now let's move beyond the data, beyond the charts, and get into the real lived experiences. Because behind every single one of those statistics is a person, a family, making just impossible choices every single day.
This is Gregory Bruce. He's a bow tie maker in Harlem. And his words, man, they just cut right to the heart of it. This isn't about abstract economics. It's about having literally 88 cents to your name. It's about working, having a craft, but your livelihood still isn't enough to guarantee your next meal, forcing you to turn to a food bank just to get by.
And this burden is not shared equally, not even close. As this data from 2021 shows, nearly 1 in 5 Black households and over 16% of Hispanic households were facing food insecurity. Now compare that to 7% for white households. And we see these same kinds of disparities with other vulnerable groups too, like people with disabilities, who make up almost a quarter of all food insecure households. Now you might think of hunger as a social issue, and it is, but it's also a massive economic problem. The cost of not feeding people properly, it just ripples through the entire economy, and it ends up affecting every single one of us. And that economic ripple effect is just enormous. Based on data from 2014, hunger cost the U.S. $5.5 billion in lost productivity from workers. It cost another $5.9 billion in special education because, let's be real, a hungry kid just can't learn. And then there's a staggering $13 billion from high school dropouts that are linked to food insecurity.
And the costs to our healthcare system? They are astronomical. Between 2011 and 2020, just 4 nutrition-related chronic diseases cost the U.S. an estimated $16 trillion. See, malnutrition doesn't just cause problems today, it creates a lifetime of expensive health issues. The bottom line is, it is far, far cheaper to just feed people than to pay for all the consequences.
So, if the problem is this big and this costly, what's really causing it? For years, one theory has kind of dominated the conversation: the food desert. But it turns out, experts are now telling us to look somewhere else entirely. First, let's just be clear on what we're talking about. A food desert is basically a low-income area where it's hard to get to a big supermarket. The whole idea was that if we just build more grocery stores in these neighborhoods, problem solved. It sounds pretty logical, right?
Well, this is what an expert in the field actually has to say about it. Completely irrelevant. It turns out study after study has shown that just giving low-income households access to the same stores as high-income ones has almost no effect on what they eat. So if access isn't the main issue, what is?
This right here, this is the real story. In 2021, the poorest 20% of households spent over 30% of their entire income just on food. For the wealthiest 20%, that number was less than 8%. The problem isn't a lack of stores, it's a lack of money. At its core, this is an economic crisis. For millions of people, wages just haven't kept up with the soaring costs of everything else. Essentials like housing and childcare. This forces these impossible choices. Do I pay the rent or do I buy groceries?
Do I pay a medical bill? Or do I fill the pantry? And because the food budget is often the most flexible thing in a family's budget, it's the first thing that gets cut.
So, given that this is fundamentally an economic problem, what are we doing about it? Let's take a look at the main tool the United States uses to fight hunger, its food safety net.
The cornerstone of that safety net is a program called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You might know it by its old name, food stamps. Basically, it gives low-income families an electronic benefit card they can use to buy groceries, so they can shop right alongside their neighbors at local stores.
And the data shows that SNAP really works. I mean, it reduces food insecurity by as much as 30%, which is huge. But here's the other side of that coin. For a lot of people, it's still not enough. Even with SNAP benefits, 1 in 3 families in the program still has to visit a food pantry because the funds just run out before the end of the month.
Now, to be fair, there has been some real progress. In 2021, the benefits were reevaluated and increased by about 20%, which was a really big deal. It was a major step towards making the benefits match the actual cost of a healthy diet. But the debate is definitely not over, and a lot of advocates argue that even with that boost, it still falls short for many families. So all of this brings us to the future. Recognizing just how big this problem is, the current administration has set a really bold, really ambitious goal for the entire country. And the goal is as clear and direct as it gets: end hunger in America by the year 2030. It's a call to action that says, hey, in a country with this much wealth and this much food, hunger is actually a solvable problem. The big question is, how? The strategy being proposed is what's called an upstream approach. It's not just about making programs like SNAP better. It's about going to the source and tackling those root economic causes we talked about earlier, investing in better wages, making housing affordable, making sure childcare is affordable. The idea is to help people so they don't need food assistance in the first place. And ultimately, this is what it all comes down to. The resources are there, the food is there, the money is there, we know the causes, and we know the solutions. So the final lingering question isn't really about capability, it's about commitment. Does the wealthiest nation on Earth have the political and social will to finally and fully feed all of its own?